Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, in this episode, we're completing the discussion that we've been talking about for the last 3 weeks on problems that leaders have with their teams, or potential problems that it is their responsibility to solve, and it might not be something that is widespread. It's localized to a team. Last week we talked about what happens when your team is playing politics. I really thought that was a great discussion. So if you haven't heard it yet, go back and listen to it. The fourth topic in this discussion, based on the article from Sam Adeyemi, is what happens when your team is losing sight of their ethics. And boy, this is a can of worms on this one, because there is so much to unpack in terms of what is unethical, what isn't, what happens when it comes from the top, like the organizational leadership as a whole, versus what happens when it's coming from the team leader as a whole, or something in middle management, and also what happens when it's happening from an individual employee, and what a leader's responsibility is to kind of address that before it becomes widespread, because there's no doubt that regardless of where it's coming from, the moment the team believes that the unethical behavior is what is either promoted or even tolerated, that will spread into a disengagement with the rest of the team, or a lack of productivity, or worst case scenario, the lack of ethics will spread, and they have a much larger problem, with a team, as opposed to it just being localized to a single person.
Yeah, whenever I hear like ethics and ethical behavior, I'm immediately pulled to like the extremes. Like,
right.
Are we lying, cheating, stealing, that type of thing, right?
Yeah.
And again, like
that's the rarity, though.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's
Yeah.
the rarity. Like, does it happen? Yes, but like that's not actually the things that become things that then can echo through a team. And I'll give you a great real personal example of myself. Like, I have over my career gotten feedback around my sense of humor, or around like just how I do things, and I overuse it from time to time. And, again, while I will always be open to the feedback, we'll accept it, we'll make adjustments, we'll learn from it, type of thing, there are elements of that where if I have relationships with people, or I have the ability to be who I am and read a room and know when to joke or how to joke and when to pull back and things like that, if I'm a leader of people and they look to emulate my behavior, they may not have all those same relationships, those same skills, those same understandings.
Yes.
And then by default, right, I'm kind of teaching this behavior as something that's okay. And again, not that it's like wildly unethical, but it could cause issues and problems amongst the team, around the culture, around how we get work done. So like, just as a small example of, I think, like things that we don't necessarily think about as like unethical behavior, but if you pull the thread on something like that, it can have a really big impact on a team, and that can cause things and decisions, or, well, if it's okay to joke around about this, then it's okay to joke around about that, and
Right.
and maybe it's not okay to joke around about that, and like that, what I'm saying? So like, those are things that for me, when I start to think about a conversation like this, I stay away from the big extremes, and I say, well, let's talk about like things that may not seem like a big problem or an issue, but really can be if you don't understand how they impact individuals and cultures, and especially when you sit in the seat of a leader, because there are things that we all do that then become replicated, as a result of just the fact that people are trying to emulate what they might believe is successful behavior.
Right. And to touch on that too, there are things that are okay for a person to do if they aren't in a leadership role, that become not okay to do in a leadership role, even if it's the exact same thing, right? It's like how speaking about like a retail environment. In a retail environment, if a person is 16 or 17 years old and they're working their first part-time job, and there's an issue with them coming to work on time, right? There's almost an assumption that that's okay, or at least there's a higher threshold for tolerance, because you expect certain things out of certain people based on where they are in their lives. And if I heard that I had a 17-year-old reporting to me that was having difficulty getting to work on time, we'd have discussions about it, and it would just be it'd be in the context of the broader knowledge that I have around that person and where they are in their lives. If I was in a a leader of a team of people who were all in their 30s and 40s, and there was a person who had a hard time getting to work on time, that implies something. Like in my own head, I think differently about that. It's like, why isn't this figured out yet? Why, or if a leader has difficulty getting to work on time, why isn't this figured out yet, right? And so there's this kind of this element of tolerance that happens when individuals do things that aren't in leadership roles, that aren't tolerated in a leadership role. And that muddies the lines of what is okay and what is not okay. Because again, like you said, if it's okay for this person, why isn't it okay for this person? And the answer might be as simple as, well, this person is in a leadership role. And that's even too vague to say, because that alone doesn't say it, but yet for some reason in my head, it does say it. It's like, well, you have a responsibility as a leader that you don't necessarily have in a non-leadership role. And so when I've seen this kind of rear its ugly head, a lot of times it's based on, I'll give you kind of a scenario or an example that I've seen happen many times. An employee has difficulty executing on things they're supposed to execute on. They don't have the skills. They haven't been given the training. They haven't been given the leadership time to make sure they have the training and skills to get something done. But they feel like they're being held accountable to getting that thing done, and there's a disconnect on the training. And so the employee who is tired of hearing, I'm falling short. I'm falling short on this and this and this all the time. They, in the absence of the skills and the training and the real work needed to get a person up to speed, they start coming up with other ways of accomplishing the same thing, other ways of accomplishing the same results. And it starts with cutting corners. And it can lead to unethical behavior with regard to how they interact with their clients or customers that can lead to the results on paper looking like they've been turned around. I have fixed this. Look at my results. They're great now. And if the leader at that point just goes, oh yeah, you're right. I can see on my spreadsheet of all the employees that you've turned this thing around. Good job to you. I'm going to stop paying attention now, as opposed to thinking, okay, let's validate this. Let's show me this in action. I want to make sure that it's not just that it's not just the results that I'm looking for. It's the behaviors that I'm looking for, because I believe that if the behaviors are there, the results will be there on a long enough timeline or on a long enough average of time. But if I don't validate that, because either A, I'm not invested in the employee actually getting better, or I don't actually care about the process, I just care about the results, because that's all I think my leader cares about. They're just hounding me about the results. So the stuff rolls downhill, right? If that's the culture, is one of the results matter, not how we got there matters, that is a breeding ground for these things happening, for the little cuttings of corners that turn into unethical behavior that then get validated because people with the great results get hyped up and have the spotlight shown on them, and they put on pedestals, and this person does a great job. Well, did they do a great job? Or are they doing things incorrectly? And a lot of that can be determined simply by looking at outliers, right? If a person is head and shoulders above literally everybody else, you're doing a disservice to your literally, it's a dereliction of duty as a leader if one person is head and shoulders above everybody else and you're not investigating why that is. If the person has turned around the results really quickly from being a low performer to being a high performer, it's also a dereliction of duty if you don't investigate, are they actually doing things right? If a person is doing an average job that is in line with other high performers on the team or in the broader environment, it might need less investigating, but it's still your responsibility as a leader to periodically investigate how the results are being obtained. Because if you don't do that, and it has turned into the cutting corners, unethical behavior from a person, again, it might spread to other people before you've done what it takes to stop that, and then you have a much bigger problem on your hands than if you addressed it with the individual.
Yeah, I like that in this kind of podcasts that I kind of went here's the behaviors that you create as a leader sometimes you're not aware of, and then
Right.
you discuss the kind of like, here's the things that can happen if you're not validating as a leader. You know what I mean? Like, and that's really the two sides, I think, of kind of the ethical element of this, because you're so right about the fact of like, how do you validate? Where do you spend your time? How do you measure success? And if it's too simple, if it's too easy, if it's just a data point, if it's just an outcome, and you're not taking the time to really understand how people did the work, then that's exactly where you are, maybe intentionally, maybe not intentionally, but you're creating these types of behaviors or potential opportunities for unethical behavior to happen because you're just simply saying it's all about this thing, and again, like in industries and in jobs and in places where the outcomes absolutely matter. Right? They
Right.
absolutely matter. You have to measure them. A part of the job is being someone as a leader, as an employee who's good at positively impacting the outcomes of the organization. Like that's taking a job and getting paid by a company to do that. Those things absolutely matter. But as a leader, a big part of that responsibility is digging into to understand how it's being done,
Right.
asking the questions, going deeper. And again, I'm just as interested in how are we so good at something as much as I am as how are we so bad at something. You know what I mean? I want to know both because the so good at something, if there is not intention there, if there is not a clear strategy aligned with values and growth and development and skill building, that is a larger issue in my mind than being bad at something and somebody saying we're just not good at it and we don't know how to do it. Okay, like we can work with that. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
We can work with teaching people how to do that. But if you're really good at something and you don't even know why or how, I need to understand that. I need to dig deeper into figuring that part out because that can create a false sense of success and believing that you're just really good at something that you may put even no effort into, and that's not helpful in building a great rounded culture of performance.
Right. I like the example you just gave of someone saying, I'm just not good at this and I don't know how to do it. And that seems like obvious and easy. But if there isn't a culture that supports people being able to do that, that's when that doesn't happen and when people start coming up with their own ways. And so if a person doesn't feel like they are safe to go to their leader and say, I just don't know how to do this. I'm not good at this. I don't know how to do this. If a person knows they can do that and the response from the leader is, I can work with that, like what you said, then you're golden. That's great. That's how you actually solve a problem. But if when a person says that, the response is an eye roll and like why did we hire you then? Like I thought you've been here long enough, you should know how to do this. The longer a person goes in a role or in a job without knowing how to do something, the harder it is to speak up and say they don't know how to do it. It's the Chris Pratt meme. I don't know what to do here, and at this point, I'm afraid to ask. Right? It's like it's easy to ask the question or to say I don't know how to do it on day one when you have like kind of blanket immunity against not knowing how to do the job. It's your first day, right? And even maybe the first few weeks of the first quarter. But at a certain point in time, you might believe that your leaders think that by this time in the role, you should know how to do this. And if you believe that's the case to the point where you don't have the ability to speak up and say, I don't know how to do something, then that's when it starts to become easy to cut corners. The other thing that I want to bring up when it comes to this kind of unethical behavior is when it comes to the leadership kind of validation. I've been in organizations where the leader was not validating the positive stuff. Like when things were going really, really well, they didn't validate that with the behaviors. And it's not because they didn't. It's not because that they wanted the lack of ethics to happen. It's because they loved the accolades they were getting for the positive results and didn't want to lift up the rug to see the roaches underneath. They were just kind of happy being able to say, I don't know that they're doing anything unethical. And it was true. They don't know but it doesn't mean it's not their responsibility to know. It is their responsibility to know. And they just decided not to know. When it comes to validating those behaviors, there's only so much that a person can do when they are several layers of leadership removed from where those behaviors are happening. So if you're a leader of leaders, then you may not have much interaction with the people who are executing whatever that strategy is. And it might be very difficult for you to validate those behaviors on an actual one-on-one basis. But that doesn't mean that it's not your responsibility to speak to your direct reports about the importance of validating those behaviors and to make sure that it sounds something like, I would love to know how they're doing this. No, you don't respond from a, yeah, right, I don't believe this, let's see how they're really doing it. No, you can assume positive intent from a standpoint of, hey, if this is working so well on your team or with this person, we're doing a disservice to everybody else if we don't kind of share the how, right? We need to figure out how to spread this out to make sure that more people are doing it well. So let's validate this with a process. Let's find out how we can get this person to get into a stretch assignment role to teach others how to do this correctly. If they're doing something unethical, believe me, they will shy away from those stretch assignments because they know that that the emperor has no clothes, right? They want to, if they're doing it correctly, they'll want the accolades. They'll be like, yeah, let me show you how I'm doing this. And you have to keep in mind at the possibility of the person legitimately believing they're doing it the right way, but they're not doing it the right way. So that it's not necessarily unethical, but it doesn't mean it doesn't need to change. If a person is doing something the wrong way, but they believe it's the right way, that just means that the accountability process doesn't look like, okay, we need to have a discussion around whether or not you belong here because the decisions you're making fall or, rise to the level of a lack of ethics. If it is truly just they don't know how to do it and they think this is the right way, then that person is salvageable with the right training and the right changes to the process. Because that's a difference between performance and character. Is the performance low, or is there a shortage of character?
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 minute hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
All right, for this episode's 1 minute hack, here's what I want you to do. If you're a leader of people whose actual behaviors you have visibility to, you need to be looking at the results as a starting point for where to investigate further. And while every person on your team deserves time to validate, the people who are the outliers, both at the high end and the low end, need that consistent validation of what the process is that led them to the results to make sure that they are doing it the right way, or the people at the low end that they have the skills to do it the right way. If you're a leader of leaders and you don't have as much access or time or visibility to the behaviors necessary to create the results, it becomes incumbent upon you to speak to your direct reports around the importance of validating the behavior every single time they come to you to talk about results. So if you're a leader of leaders and the person comes to you and says, look at what my team is doing. These are the people who are doing it really well. I love what they're doing. These are the people that I'm working with. And they're talking about how well the team is from a results standpoint. The very next words out of your mouth should be, how are they doing it? I want to know how they're doing it. And if that leader of people who reports to you can't speak to that, oh, this is how they're doing it. This A, B, C, D, these are the steps. If they can't speak to it right away, it means that they have not validated it themselves. If they're kind of pencil whipping it on the fly, like I got to make this up as I go, you'll be able to know that. So figure out whether or not they actually can speak to the why behind it, because if that's not the first words out of your mouth, then the person that you're speaking to will be under the impression that what's important to you is the result, not the behavior that got there. And while the results are important, they're merely a validator for behaviors. And if the behaviors are in line with the ethics and the values of the organization, and that leader can speak to the behaviors that are actually happening, then you're on the right track. But again, pushing back on how did they get there should be the first thing you say, because that will create a culture on your team that says, okay, my boss knows that what's important here isn't just the results, it's how we got there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a great call out, and taking the time again to just get into the how. That's the biggest thing for me, is like, hey, I see that you've kind of got the what down. This is what we're measuring. This is what you're doing. And I can see that, but I need to see the how. Walk me through it. What's the commitments? What are the actions? What are the behaviors? What are the expectations? Now let's go validate that in fact what you're saying you're doing is exactly what you're doing. And then again, on the flip side of that, if you're having struggles, or you're seeing people that have opportunities with things, it's important to get to them as well and say, hey, I see it. Right? Yeah. Let's work together to figure this out and make sure that you can see some progress and some improvement here. Because if you don't address that also can lead to unethical behavior, because they may be desperate to do whatever they can to get whatever they're trying to get. And that could cause a major issue as well from a leadership standpoint.
Right. And the last thing I want to say about this is that one of the ways you can create this culture is by how you decide who to call out positively for what they're getting done, and making that rooted in behaviors. So if all you're doing to your team is calling out, hey, this is Lorenzo, let's give it up for Lorenzo. He had the highest sales last month, right? He had the highest customer retention last month. Then Lorenzo's always getting called out as the top. And now people who are not as good think, I need to get more sales, whatever that looks like. But if you as a leader have done your due diligence to validate the behaviors, you will see positive behaviors out of everybody on the team and negative behaviors, even the people who are not at the top and at the bottom. So it's like the broken clock is right twice a day. The people who are kind of average on the team, I bet they have really great interactions and really great behaviors at least some of the time. And so while they may need some extra help to get through it all the time, if you're calling out positively, not just a person who has the great results, but if you're saying, hey, let's give it up for Lorenzo and Chris, what they did last quarter in terms of customer attention looked like this. They had these interactions with their customers. They sent these follow-up emails. They had these conversations where I heard them say this thing. Not this is the result, but this is the behavior. If all you're calling out to the broader team as a whole, that what you're looking for is rooted in behaviors, and the results are just something that you use behind the scenes to validate those behaviors, your team will very quickly get the impression that what's important is behaviors, and they will try to replicate the behaviors, not replicate the results.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hack Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.